Good afternoon from Sacred Space at Titania's Realm. It's 5:18 p.m. on the 15th of February 2024. I feel inspired to continue reading some Yiddish written by a Yiddish author, short stories. They're translated into English, of course, because I don't speak Yiddish. But I'm very fond of Isaac Bashevis singer, and his stories speak of a world that was completely eliminated, annihilated, desecrated during the Shoah of Polish Jewry and all Eastern Bloc Jewry for that matter. I like to read these stories and immerse myself in a world that is long gone and probably will never be again. But it brings back to life the culture of what it was like to live in pre-Nazi Germany, right? So I haven't actually read through to see what the stories are about, so I'll be just as surprised as you are. I have read them as a young woman. Prior to my conversion, I was collecting lots of Jewish authors and immersing myself in that world to get a feel of the culture and what it feels to be a Jew. And it's part of my desire to be a Jew, right? Well, I was overcompensating ever so slightly, but my neshama was always Jewish, so I guess I was really desiring to return home to that world that no longer exists because it was completely destroyed. So the neshama knows what the neshama knows, and I was craving Yiddish authors and Yiddish culture and Kabbalistic knowledge, and I still sometimes crave these things even after all these years of being absent from my community for reasons I've outlined in other videos. So we won't hash over that again. It's just a seeping wound for me. My dinner is ready. Oh well, I can heat it up later. So Isaac Bashevis singer, Gimple the Fool, a potent blend of magic, mystery and myth. And as you know, I am also an occultist, and I do love magic, mystery and myth and the paranormal, especially as it relates to Jewish folk traditions. Charlie. So we begin the story. It's entitled From the Diary of One Not Born, Chapter 1. Where man does not walk, where cattle do not tread, Friday the 13th of the 13th month, between day and night, behind the black mountains, in the wasted woodland, at the castle of Asmodeus, by the light of a charmed moon. I, the author of these things, was blessed by a good fortune that comes to only 1 in 10,000. I was not born. My father, a yeshiva student, sinned as did Onan, and from his seed I was created, half spirit, half demon, half air, half shade, horned like a buck and winged like a bat, with the mind of a scholar and the heart of a highwayman. I am and I am not. I whistle down chimneys and dance in the public bath. Public bath is called a mikveh. I overturn the pot of Shabbat food in a poor man's kitchen. I make a woman unclean when her husband returns from a trip. That means he makes her menstruate. I like to play all kinds of pranks. Once, when a young rabbi was preaching his first sermon in the synagogue on the great Shabbat before the Passover, I turned myself into a fly and bit the learned man on the tip of his nose. He flicked me off, but I flew to the lobe of his ear. He stretched out his hand to drive me away, but I danced off onto his high forehead and paraded around between the deep rabbinical furrows. He preached and I sang, and I had the pleasure of hearing this newly hatched scholar, still wet behind the ears, scramble the text and forget the profundities which he had expected to pour from his sleeve. Oh yes, his enemies had a gay Shabbat, and oh, how his wife berated him that evening. Indeed, the quarrel between man and wife went so far that, I blush to tell you, she would not let him into her bed Passover night, when every Jewish husband should be a king and every Jewish wife a queen. And if it had been destined for her to conceive Messiah, then I nipped that in the bud. Since my lifespan is eternal, and since I don't have to worry about making a living, bringing up children, or accounting for my deeds, I do just as I please. Evenings, I watch the women at the ritual bath, the mikveh, or make my way into the bedrooms of pious folk and listen to the forbidden talk between man and wife. I enjoy reading other people's letters and counting up the amounts in women's nest eggs. So sharp are my ears. Yes, Charlie. Come. Okay. So sharp are my ears that I can hear thoughts behind the skull. And although I have no mouth and am dumb as a fish, I can, when the occasion arises, make a cutting remark. I have no need of money, but I like to commit petty thieveries. I steal pins from women's dresses and loosen their bows and knots. I hide important papers and wills. What malicious deeds do I not do? For instance, a Jewish landowner, Reb Paltiel, a learned man of a distinguished family and a charitable nature, became impoverished. His cows stopped giving milk, his land became barren, his bees made no more honey. Things went from bad to worst. Reb Paltiel could see that his luck was turning, and he said to himself, well, I'll die a poor man. He had a few volumes of the Talmud and a Psalter, so he sat down to pray and study, thinking, the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away. As long as I have bread, I will eat, and when that too is gone, the time will have come to take a sack and a stick and go begging. The man had a wife, Grena Pesha, and she had a wealthy brother, Reb Getz, in Warsaw. So she began to nag her husband. What's the sense of sitting here and waiting until the last loaf is eaten? Go to Warsaw and tell my brother what has happened. Her husband was a proud man, however, and he replied, "I don't want any favours from anyone. If it is God's will that I be provided for, he will give me from his full hand, and if it is my fate to be a pauper, this trip would be a needless self-abasement." But as women have been given 9 measures of garrulousness and only half a measure of faith, she pleaded and insisted until he capitulated. He put on his shabby fur coat with the moth-eaten foxtails, took a covered wagon to Rivets, from thence to Lublin, and then he was bounced and jounced for days between Lublin and Warsaw. Yes, Charlie, she's joining in. The trip was long and arduous, the covered wagon jogging along for nearly a week. Nights, Reb Paltiel slept at wayside inns. It was right after the Feast of Tabernacles, when the skies are heavy with rain. The wagon wheels sank deep into the mire. Their spokes were covered with mud. To make a long story short, the Warsaw Croesus, I don't even know how to pronounce that word, Croesus, Croesus. Reb Getz grimaced, complained, bit his beard, and muttered that newfound relatives, both on his side and on his wife's, were crawling out of the cracks in the walls. And finally he took out a 500 gulden note, gave it to his needy brother-in-law, and bade him farewell. Half warmly, half coldly, smiling and sighing, and asking to be remembered to his sister. A sister is, after all, a sister, one's own flesh and blood. Reb Paltiel took the banknote, put it into his breast pocket, and started home. Truly the humiliation he had suffered was worth more than 5 times 500 gulden. But what's a man to do? Obviously, there's a time for honours and a time for indignities. And anyway, the indignities were in the past, and the 500 gulden were in his pocket. And with such a sum, one could buy cows and horses and goats, and repair the roof, and pay taxes, and take care of heaven knows how many other necessaries. I was right there. I happened at the time to be a flea in Reb Paltiel's beard. And I whispered to him, "Well, what do you say? The fact is that Grana Pesha isn't so crazy." He answered me. Evidently it was decreed. Who knows? Maybe heaven wanted me to atone for some sin, and from now on my luck will be better. On the last night of the return trip, a heavy snow fell and there was a severe frost. The wagon couldn't move over the icy road, and Reb Paltiel had to take a sleigh. He arrived home, frozen, exhausted from the long journey, hoarse and worn. He went into the house immediately. His wife, Grana Pesha, was sitting by the hearth, warming herself. When she saw him, she let out a shriek. "Woe is me, what you look like! I've seen them very healthier-looking specimens." When he heard these lamentations, Reb Paltiel stuck his hand into his breast pocket, drew out the banknote, laid it down and announced, "Take it, it's yours." And he gave her the gift of charity, which had cost him so much. Grana Pesha's face went from joy to gloom and back to joy. "So, Val, I had expected 1,000, she said, "but 500 isn't to be sneezed at either." And as she was saying these words, I sprang out of Reb Paltiel's beard and sat myself on Grana Pesha's nose. I jumped with such force that the poor woman dropped the paper and it fell into the fire. And before either of them could cry out, a green and blue flame shot up, and of the 500 gulden, only an ash remained. Well, what purpose would be served by telling you what he said and what she answered? You can imagine it yourself. I leapt back into Reb Paltiel's beard and stayed there until, and I hate to have to tell you this, he was forced to take a sack and a stick and go begging. Try to hang a flea, try to run away from bad luck, try to figure out where the evil spirit is. In my fucking roof, isn't it? But not anymore, darlings. Not anymore. When I returned to the Black Mountains and told Asmodeus what I had done, he pinched my ear and repeated the story to his wife Lilith, and she laughed with such abandon that the desert rang with the echoes of her glee, and she herself, the queen of Satan's court, tweaked my nose. "You really are a first-rate little devil," she said to me. "Some day you'll do big things." Number 2. Where the heavens are copper and the earth iron, on a field of toadstools, in a ruined outhouse, on a dung heap, in a pot without a bottom, on a Shabbat night during the winter solstice, not to be thought of now, nor later, nor at night. Amen, Salah. The false prophecies of my mistress Lilith have been fulfilled. I am no longer an imp, but a full-grown devil, and a male at that. I can disguise myself as a human, play my malicious pranks, and make men's eyes deceive them. True, I can be driven off by a holy spell, but these days, who knows Kabbalah? The little rabbis can pour salt on my tail. The amulets are nothing but waste paper to me. Their charms make me laugh. More than once I've left a souvenir of devil dung in one of their skull caps, or tied knots in their beards. Yes, I do frightful things. I'm a demon among demons, an evil one among evil ones. One moonlit night, I turned myself into a sack of salt and lay down by the roadside. Soon a wagon came along. Seeing the full sack, the driver stopped his horse, jumped out, and hoisted me onto the cart. Who wouldn't take something for nothing? I was heavy as lead, and the ignoramus could hardly lift me. As soon as I was in the wagon, he opened the mouth of the sack and took a lick. Evidently, he wanted to find out whether I was salt or sugar. In a second, I had become a calf, and I'll give you 3 guesses where he was licking me. When he saw what he was doing, the poor wretch nearly went crazy. His hands and feet began to tremble. "What's going on here?" he cried. "Where the devil am I?" Suddenly I flapped my wings and flew away like an eagle. The drayman arrived home, a sick man. And now he goes around with an amulet and a piece of charmed amber, but they'll do him as much good as cupping a corpse. One winter I came to the village of Turbin in the form of a solicitor collecting for the needy in the Holy Land. I went from house to house, opening the metal alms boxes which hung on the doors and taking out the small change, mostly worn halfpennies. From one of the houses came the smell of an overheated oven. The owner was a maiden in her 30s, both of whose parents were dead. She supported herself by baking cookies for the yeshiva students. She was short and stout and with a large bosom and an even larger, what do you call it? What do you call it? Never mind. The house was warm, the air redolent of cinnamon and poppy seeds, and it occurred to me that there would be nothing to be lost by marrying this old maid for a while. I smoothed my red side locks. I combed my beard with my fingers. I blew my frostbitten nose and had a chat with the girl. One word led to another. I told her I was a childless widower. "I'm not a big earner, but I have a few hundred gulden in a purse beneath my fringed garment." "Is your wife dead long?" she asks, and I answer, "It'll be 3 years, the fast of Esther." She asks, "What was the matter with her?" And I reply, "She died in childbirth," and groan. She can see that I'm an honest fellow. Why else would a man mourn 3 years after his wife? In short, it's a match. The women of the town take the orphan under their wings. They collect a dowry for her. They supply her with tablecloths, napkins, sheets, shirts, petticoats, drawers. And since she is a virgin, they erect the wedding canopy in the synagogue court. The wedding presents are given, everyone dances with the newlyweds, and the bride is carried off to her bedroom. "Good luck," the best man says to me. "I hope next year there'll be a circumcision feast." The guests leave. The night is long and dark. The bedroom is warm as an oven and black as Egypt. My bride is already in bed under a down quilt. She had plucked the down herself, waiting for her husband. I grope around in the darkness. For the sake of appearances, I undress, cough softly, and whisper to myself. "Are you tired?" I ask. "Not so tired," she answers. "You know," I say, "the other one, peace to her soul, was always tired. Poor thing, she was weak." "Don't talk about her now," my wife admonishes. "May she put in a word for us in heaven." "I want to tell you something," I say, "but don't get upset." On her deathbed, Charlie, she asked me to give her my holy word that I wouldn't marry again. "You didn't promise." "Did I have any choice? You know it's forbidden to grieve the dying." "You should have asked the rabbi what to do." The cookie baker says to me, "Why didn't you tell me earlier? What's the matter? Are you afraid she'll come back to choke you?" "God forbid," she answers. "How am I to blame? I knew nothing about it." I get into bed, my body icy. "Why are you so cold?" my wife asks. "Do you really want to know? Come closer and I'll whisper it into your ear." "Nobody can hear you," she says, astonished. "There's a saying that the walls have ears," I reply. She cocks her ear and I spit right into it. She shudders and sits up. The bedboards squeak. The straw mattress begins to sag and crack. "What are you doing?" she shrieks. "Is that supposed to be clever?" Instead of answering, I begin to titter. She says, "What kind of game is this? It may be all right for a child, but not for a grown man." Oh dear, I was married to an idiot like that. He used to get cotton, you know, like cotton thread for sewing cotton, white cotton thread. And the moron would put it in his mouth and suck and lick it and that, you know. And then while I was sleeping or dozing, or usually reading a book similar to this, probably the same fucking book if the truth be known, probably the very same page if the truth be known, because, you know, synchronicity and all, the motherfucker would get the piece of thread and he would put it into my ear like this wet saliva sodden, and then he would giggle, and that's how I knew I had married a moron. Well, I had a few other clues, but that was one of the giveaways, right? Anywho, the Dybbuk made him do it clearly, because this is what the Dybbuk here did, spat into his wife's ear too. Ugh, it's the most revolting thing that can happen to you. Anyway, where was I? "And how do you know I'm not a child?" I answer. "I'm a child with a beard. Billy goats have beards too." "Well then," she says, "if you want to babble, babble. Good night." And she turns her face to the wall. For a while we both lie quietly, and I have to put on the air conditioning. And then I give her a pinch where she's fattest. Yes, Charlie. And then I give her a pinch where she's fattest. My wife shoots up into the air. The bed shakes. She lets out a scream. "Are you crazy or what? What are you pinching me for? Heaven help me. What kind of hands have I fallen into?" And she begins to weep hoarsely, as can only a friendless orphan who has waited over 30 years for her lucky day, and then finds herself espoused to a monster. A robber's heart would have melted. I'm sure that God himself shed a tear that night, but a devil is a devil. At daybreak, I creep out of the house and go over to the rabbi's. The rabbi, a saintly man, is already at his studies and is shocked to see me. "God bless a Jew," he says. "Why so early?" "It's true that I'm a stranger here and only a poor man, but the town didn't have to wish a whore on me." "A whore? What else is a bride who isn't a virgin?" I ask. Whew. Whew. The rabbi tells me to wait for him in the study house and goes to wake up his wife. She gets dressed, even forgetting to wash her hands, and rouses some of her cronies. A little knot of women, including the rabbi's wife, goes over to my brides to investigate. and to look at the bed sheets. Turban is no Sodom, and if there's a sin, the town has to know about it. I feel like there's all this activity around me, swirling in infinity, and we say, hallelujah. My wife weeps bitterly. She swears that I hadn't come near her all night. She insists that I'm crazy, that I pinched her and spat in her ear, but the women shake their heads. They bring the defendant to the rabbi. They parade her through the marketplace, the townsfolk peering from every window. The study house is crowded. My wife moans and wails. She vows that no man has ever touched her, including me. He's a madman, she says, and turns on me, but I insist that she's lying. As a matter of fact, I announce, let a doctor examine her. Where will we find a doctor in turban, they asked. All right, yes, I say, then take her to Lublin. There's still some decency in the world, I screech. I'll see to it that all of Poland hears about this. I'll tell the rabbinical council the whole story. Be sensible. How are we to blame? Asks one of the elders. It's the responsibility of all of Israel, I answer piously. Whoever heard of a town letting a girl stay unmarried until she's over 30 and having her bake cookies for the yeshiva students? My wife realizes that I'm trying to ruin her business too, and she rushes up to me with clenched fists. She's ready to hit me, and she would have if she hadn't been restrained. Now, people, I scream, see how shameless she is. By now it's apparent to everyone that I'm the honourable one, not she. In short, the rabbi says, we still have a God in heaven. Divorce her and get rid of her. I beg your pardon, I say, but I had expenses. The wedding cost me a good 100 gulden. And so the bargaining begins. From her cookie baking, my wife has managed to save, penny by penny, some 70-odd gulden. They urge me to settle for that, but I'm adamant. Let her sell the wedding presents, I say. And the girl shrieks, take everything, tear out my insides. And she claws at her face and cries out, oh, mother, I wish I were lying in the grave with you. She beats her fists on the table, overturning the ink bottle, and sobs, if this could happen to me, there's no God. The beadle dashes over and slaps her, and she falls to the floor, her dress pulled up, her kerchief off her head. They try to lift her up, but she kicks, flails her arms and laments, you're not Jews, but beasts. Nevertheless, that evening, I collect my 100 gulden. The scribe sits down to write out the divorce papers. Suddenly I announce that I have to go out for a moment, and I never return. They search for me half the night. They call me, halloo, after me. They hunt high and low. My wife becomes a permanent grass widow, and so, despite God, the town, and her own bad luck, she throws herself into the well. Asmodeus himself praised my little job. Not bad, he said, you're on the way. And he sent me to Machlat, the daughter of Namah, the she-devil who teaches young demons the paths of corruption. Let's see what else we can read. That was a nice short one. This one after it is another short one. So we'll read this one. The Old Man, Chapter 1. At the beginning of the Great War, Chaim Zachar of Krochmalna Street in Warsaw was a rich man. Having put aside dowries of 1,000 rubles each for his daughters, he was about to rent a new apartment, large enough to include a Torah-studying son-in-law. There would also have to be additional room for his 90-year-old father, Reb Moshe Ber, a Turisk Chassid who had recently come to live with him in Warsaw. But 2 years later, Chaim Zachar's apartment was almost empty. No one knew where his 2 sons, young giants, who had been sent to the front, had been buried. His wife and 2 daughters had died of typhus. He had accompanied their bodies to the cemetery, reciting the memorial prayer for the 3 of them, preempting the most desirable place at the prayer stand in the synagogue, and inviting the enmity of other mourners who accused him of taking unfair advantage in his multiple bereavement. After the German occupation of Warsaw, Chaim Zachar, a tall, broad man of 60 who traded in live geese, locked his store. He sold his furniture by the piece in order to buy frozen potatoes and mouldy dried peas, and prepared gritty blackish noodles for himself and his father, who had survived the grandchildren. Although Chaim Zachar had not for many months been near a live fowl, his large kaftan was still covered with goose down. His great broad-brimmed hat glistened with fat, and his heavy snub-toed boots were stained with slaughterhouse blood. 2 small eyes, starved and frightened, peered from beneath his dishevelled eyebrows. The red rims about his eyes were reminiscent of the time when he could wash down a dish of fried liver and hard-boiled eggs with a pint of vodka every morning after prayer. Now, all day long, he wandered through the marketplace, inhaling butcher shop odours and those from restaurants, sniffling like a dog and occasionally napping on porters' carts. With the refuse he had collected in a basket, he fed his kitchen stove at night. Then, rolling the sleeves over his hairy arms, he would grate turnips on a grater. His father, meanwhile, sat warming himself at the open kitchen door, even though it was midsummer. An open Mishnah treatise lay across his knees, and he complained constantly of hunger. As though it were his son's fault, the old man would mutter angrily, "I can't stand it much longer, this gnawing." Without looking up from his book, a treatise on impurity, he would indicate the pit of his stomach and resume his mumbling, in which the word impure recurred like a refrain. Although his eyes were a murky blue, like the eyes of a blind man, he needed no glasses, still retained some of his teeth, yellow and crooked as rusty nails, and awoke each day on the side on which he had fallen asleep. He was disturbed only by his rupture, which nonetheless did not keep him from plodding through the streets of Warsaw with the help of his pointed stick, his horse, as he called it. At every synagogue he would tell stories about wars, about evil spirits, and of the old days of cheap and abundant living, when people dried sheepskins in cellars and drank spirits directly from the barrel through a straw. In return, Reb Moshe Bear was treated to raw carrots, slices of radish, and turnips. Little ones wanting to go to sleep. I'll just finish this paragraph and I'll sneak off, put her back into her bed. And turnips. Finishing them in no time, he would then, with a trembling hand, pluck each crumb from his thinning beard, still not white, and speak of Hungary, where more than 70 years before he had lived in his father-in-law's house. Right after prayer, we were served a large decanter of wine and a side of veal, and with the soup there were hard-boiled eggs and crunchy noodles. Hollow-cheeked men in rags with ropes about their loins stood about him, bent forward, mouths watering, digesting each of his words, the whites of their eyes greedily showing as if the old man actually sat there eating. Young yeshiva students, faces emaciated from fasts, eyes shifty and restless as those of madmen, nervously twisted their long earlocks around their fingers, grimacing as though to suppress stomach aches, repeating ecstatically, "That was the time a man had his share of heaven and earth, but now we have nothing." So I'm just going to leave you for a little moment because it's Birdie Num Num bedtime, and she takes her sleepy by time very, very seriously indeed. Oh, and it just pooped on Mama again, you monstrous little birdie. Here we go. Sleepies now. Sleepies. I'm back. For many months, Reb Moshe Bear shuffled about searching for a bit of food. Got water on this book, that's not good. Then one night in late summer, on returning home, he found Chaim Zachar, his firstborn, lying in bed, sick, barefoot, and without his kaftan. Chaim Zachar's face was as red as though he had been to a steam bath, and his beard was crumpled in a knot. A neighbour woman came in, touched his forehead and chanted, "Woe is me, it's that sickness. He must go to a hospital." Next morning, the black ambulance reappeared in the courtyard. Chaim Zachar was taken to the hospital. His apartment was sprayed with carbolic acid, and his father was led to the disinfection centre, where they gave him a long white robe and shoes with wooden soles. The guards, who knew him well, gave him double portions of bread under the table and treated him to cigarettes. The Sukkot holiday had passed by the time the old man, his shaven chin concealed beneath a kerchief, was allowed to leave the disinfection centre. His son had died long before, and Reb Moshe Bear said the memorial prayer, Kaddish, for him. Now alone in the apartment, he had to feed his stove with paper and wood shavings from garbage cans. In the ashes he baked rotten potatoes, which he carried in his scarf, and in an iron pot he brewed chicory. He kept house made his own candles by kneading bits of wax and suet around wicks, laundered his shirt beneath the kitchen faucet and hung it to dry on a piece of string. He set the mouse traps each night and drowned the mice each morning. When he went out, he never forgot to fasten the heavy padlock on the door. No one had to pay rent in Warsaw at that time. Moreover, he wore his son's boots and trousers. His old acquaintances in the houses of study envied him. He lives like a king, they said. He has inherited his son's fortune. The winter was difficult. There was no coal, and since several tiles were missing from the stove, the apartment was filled with thick, black smoke each time the old man made a fire. A crust of blue ice and snow covered the window panes by November, making the rooms constantly dark or dusky. Overnight, the water on his night table froze in the pot. No matter how many clothes he piled over him in bed, he never felt warm. His feet remained stiff, and as soon as he began to doze, the entire pile of clothes would fall off, and he would have to climb out naked to make his bed once more. There was no kerosene, even matches were at a premium. Although he recited chapter upon chapter of the Psalms, he could not fall asleep. The wind, freely roaming about the rooms, banged the doors. Even the mice left. When he hung up his shirt to dry, it would grow brittle and break like glass. He stopped washing himself. His face became coal black. All day long he would sit in the house of study near the red-hot iron stove. On the shelves the old books lay like piles of rags. Tramps stood around the tin-topped tables, nondescript fellows with long matted hair and rags over their swollen feet. Men who, having lost all they had in the war, were half naked or covered only with torn clothes, bags slung over their shoulders. All day long, while orphans recited Kaddish, women stood in throngs around the Holy Ark, loudly praying for the sick and filling his ears with their moans and lamentations. The room, dim and stuffy, smelled like a mortuary chamber from the numerous anniversary candles that were burning. Every time Reb Moshe Ber, his head hanging down, fell asleep, he would burn himself on the stove. He had to be escorted home at night, for his shoes were hobnailed, and he was afraid he might slip on the ice. The other tenants in his house had given him up for dead. Poor thing, he's gone to pieces. One December day, Reb Moshe Ber actually did slip, receiving a hard blow on his right arm. The young man escorting him hoisted Reb Moshe Ber on his back and carried him home. Placing the old man on his bed without undressing him, the young man ran away as though he had committed a burglary. For 2 days the old man groaned, called for help, wept, but no one appeared. I know how that feels. Several times each day he said his confession of sins, praying for death to come quickly, pounding his chest with his left hand. It was quiet outside in the daytime, as though everyone had died. A hazy green twilight came through the windows. At night he heard scratching noises as though a cat were trying to climb the walls, a hollow roar A hollow roar seemed to come repeatedly from underground. In the darkness, the old man fancied that his bed stood in the middle of the room and all the windows were open. After sunset on the second day, he thought he saw the door open suddenly, admitting a horse with a black sheet on its back. It had a head as long as a donkey's and innumerable eyes. The old man knew at once that this was the angel of death. Terrified, he fell from his bed, making such a racket that 2 neighbours heard it. There was a commotion in the courtyard. A crowd gathered and an ambulance was summoned. When he came to his senses, Reb Moshe Ber found himself in a dark box, bandaged and covered up. He was sure this was his hearse, and it worried him that he had no heirs to say Kaddish, and that, therefore, the peace of his grave would be disturbed. Suddenly he recalled the verses he would have to say to Duma, the prosecuting angel, and his bruised, swollen face twisted into a corpse-like smile. What man is he that liveth and shall not see death? Shall he deliver his soul from the grave? Chapter 2. After Passover, Reb Moshe Ber was discharged from the hospital. Completely recovered, he once more had a great appetite, but nothing to eat. All his possessions had been stolen. In the apartment, only the peeling walls remained. He remembered Yosefov, a little village near the border of Galicia, where for 50 years he had lived and enjoyed great authority in the tourist Hasidic circle because he had personally known the old rabbi. He inquired about the possibilities of getting there, but those he questioned merely shrugged their shoulders, and each said something different. Some assured him Josefov had been burned to the ground, wiped out. A wandering beggar, on the other hand, who had visited the region, said that Josefov was more prosperous than ever, that its inhabitants ate the Sabbath white bread even on weekdays. But Josefov was on the Austrian side of the border, and whenever Reb Moshe Ber broached the subject of his trip, men smiled mockingly in their beards and waved their hands. Don't be foolish, Reb Moshe Ber. Even a young man couldn't do it. But Reb Moshe Ber was hungry. All the turnips, carrots, and watery soups he had eaten in public kitchens had left him with a hollow sensation in his abdomen. All night he would dream of Josefov knishes stuffed with ground meat and onions, of tasty concoctions of tripe and calf's feet, chicken feet and lean beef. The moment he closed his eyes, he would find himself at some wedding or circumcision feast. Large brown rolls were piled up on the long table, and tourist Hasidim in silken kaftans with high velvet hats over their skull caps danced, glasses of brandy in their hands, singing, "What's a poor man cooking for his dinner? Borscht and potatoes, borscht and potatoes. Faster, faster, hop, hop, hop." He was the chief organizer of all those parties. He quarrelled with the caterers, scolded the musicians, supervised every detail, and having no time to eat anything, had to postpone it all for later. His mouth watering, he awoke each morning, bitter that not even in his dream he had tasted those wonderful dishes. His heart pounded, his body was covered with a cold perspiration. The light outside seemed brighter every day, and in the morning rectangular patterns of sunlight would waver on the peeling wall, swirling as though they mirrored the rushing waves of a river close by. Around the bare hook for a chandelier on the crumbling ceiling, flies hummed. The cool golden glow of dawn illumined the window panes, and the distorted image of a bird in flight was always reflected in them. Beggars and cripples sang their songs in the courtyard below, playing their fiddles and blowing little brass trumpets. In his shirt, Reb Moshe Bear would crawl down from the one remaining bed to warm his feet and stomach and to gaze at the barefoot girls in short petticoats who were beating red comforters. In all directions, feathers flew like white blossoms, and there were familiar scents of rotten straw and tar. The old man, straightening his crooked fingers, pricking up his long hairy ears as though to hear distant noises, thought for the 1000th time that if he didn't get out of here this very summer, he never would. God will help me, he would tell himself, if he wills it. I'll be eating in a holiday arbor at Yosefov. He wasted a lot of time at first by listening to people who told him to get a passport and apply for a visa. After being photographed, he was given a yellow card, and then he had to stand with hordes of others for weeks outside the Austrian consulate on a crooked little street somewhere near the Vistula. They were constantly being cursed in German and punched with the butts of guns by bearded, pipe-smoking soldiers. Women with infants in their arms wept and fainted. It was rumoured that visas were granted only to prostitutes and to men who paid in gold. Reb Moshe Bear, going there every day at sunrise, sat on the ground and nodded over his B'nai Issachar treatise, nourishing himself with grated turnips and mouldy red radishes. But since the crowd continued to increase, he decided one day to give it all up. Selling his cotton-padded kaftan to a peddler, he bought a loaf of bread and a bag in which he placed his prayer shawl and phylacteries, as well as a few books for good luck, and planning to cross the border illegally, he set out on foot. It took him 5 weeks to get to Ivangorod. During the day, while it was warm, he walked barefoot across the fields, his boots slung over his shoulders, peasant fashion. He fed on unripened grain and slept in barns. German military police often stopped him, scrutinized his Russian passport for a long time, searched him to see that he was not carrying contraband, and then let him go. At various times as he walked, his intestines popped out of place. He lay on the ground and pushed them back with his hands. In a village near Ivangorod, he found a group of tourist Hasidim, most of them young. When they heard where he was going and that he intended to enter Galicia, or Galicia, I think it's Galicia actually, they gaped at him, blinking. Then After whispering among themselves, they warned him, "You're taking a chance in times like these. They'll send you to the gallows on the slightest pretext." Afraid to converse with him, lest the authorities grow suspicious, they gave him a few marks and got rid of him. A few days later, in that village, people spoke in hushed voices of an old Jew who had been arrested somewhere on the road and shot by a firing squad. But not only was Reb Moshe alive by then, he was already on the Austrian side of the border. For a few marks, a peasant had taken him across, hidden in a cart under a load of straw. The old man started immediately for, I'm going to have trouble with this one, Rajovic. He fell ill with dysentery there and lay in the poorhouse for several days. Everyone thought he was dying, but he recovered gradually. Now there was no shortage of food. Housewives treated Reb Moshe Ber to brown buckwheat with milk, and on Saturdays he even ate cold calf's foot jelly and drank a glass of brandy. Can't think of anything more revolting, but I guess that was a luxury in those days. It would have been delicious, right? Yuck. The moment his strength returned, he was off again. The roads were familiar here. In this region, the peasants still wore the white linen coats and quadrangular caps with tassels that they had worn 50 years ago. They had beards and spoke Ukrainian. In Zamość, the old man was arrested and thrown into jail with 2 young peasants. The police confiscated his bag. He refused Gentile food and accepted only bread and water. Every other day he was summoned by the commandant who, as though Reb Moshe Ber were deaf, screamed directly into his ear in a throaty language. Comprehending nothing, Reb Moshe Ber simply nodded his head and tried to throw himself at the commandant's feet. This went on until after Rosh Hashanah. Only then did the Zamość Jews learn that an old man from abroad was being held in jail. The rabbi and the head of the community obtained his release by paying the commandant a ransom. Reb Moshe Ber was invited to stay in Zamość until after Yom Kippur, but he would not consider it. He spent the night there, took some bread, and set out on foot for Bilgorai at daybreak. Trudging across harvested fields, digging turnips for food, he refreshed himself in the thick pine woods with whitish berries, large, sour, and watery, which grow in damp places and are called valachi in the local dialect. A cart gave him a lift for a mile or so. A few miles from Bilgorai, or Bilgorai, yeah, that sounds more like it. He was thrown to the ground by some shepherds who pulled off his boots and ran away with them. Reb Moshe Ber continued barefoot, and for this reason did not reach Bilgorai until late at night. A few tramps spending the night in the house of study refused to let him in, and he had to sit on the steps, his weary head on his knees. The autumnal night was clear and cold against the dark yellow against the dark yellow dull glow of the starry... I've got to find my charger. Oh, gosh. Of the dull glow of the starry sky, a flock of goats, silently absorbed, peeled bark from the wood that had been piled in the synagogue courtyard for winter. As though complaining of an unforgettable sorrow, an owl lamented in a womanish voice, falling silent and then beginning again, over and over. People with wood lanterns in their hands came at daybreak to say the Slichot prayers. Bringing the old man inside, they placed him near the stove and covered him with discarded prayer shawls from the chest. Later in the morning, they brought him a heavy pair of hobnailed, coarse-leathered military boots. The boots pinched the old man's feet badly. I've just lost it. Sorry. I'm triggered by the mention of the discarded prayer shawls. It triggered a memory, a very painful memory of my firstborn, Crystal Natalia Aarons's Talia Bat Michael Verroet, her bat mitzvah here in Brisbane, and my evil, filthy, disgusting former friend, Gila Rosalie, and her brother, Terry Rosilio, who literally threatened us for 18 months in the most vile, disgusting ways. Well, you know, prior to that, my daughter's bat mitzvah, I was preparing for the bat mitzvah, and I was wanting to, because I'm a Reformed Jew, a progressive Jew, so I was wanting to buy a prayer shawl, preferably to come, you know, to buy from Israel for Crystal's bat mitzvah. And I was pricing prayer shawls, and of course, for one to be bought from Israel was very expensive. So I was pricing prayer shawls in the shop in Golds in Melbourne. And then Gila came to visit my mother, who, by the way, was not Jewish. And between them, they really were evil, demonic. They were interfering in even my Jewish practice and my Jewish life. Both of them. Gila, a Jew, and an Israeli, and my non-Jewish mother, right? So they start screaming at me about, who do I think I am, and why do I need a tallit for Crystal, and only men wear tallit, which is true in Gila's worldview because she was Israeli and Orthodox. But she knew damn well, because she'd been many times to the progressive shul with me, and independently, even flirting with the rabbi shamelessly at one stage, which was utterly embarrassing. She knew damn well that women in the progressive movement wear tallits and are considered equal to the men, and that we get called up for aliyot to the Torah, and we wear our prayer shawls. So that the two of them, I think, and Buck joined in, which was even more disgusting since he also was not Jewish and my enemy. And they start screaming at me about, why do you want a prayer shawl for Crystal? And, you know, how dare you? And then Buck starts screaming that I'm not even a Jew and an imposter, which, like, what would he know about anything? He wasn't Jewish at all. He's just some fucking psychopath. Anyway, between the three of them, they managed to cause me so much fucking distress. And then at the end of that, I did indeed manage to buy Crystal a nice prayer shawl. And but they were just, that fight, that scene, it just flashed back to me that, and they were literally foaming at the mouth, and it was the ugliest thing. So, and then what reminded me of the discarded prayer shawl part, that line, was when Jasmine's, oh, by the way, that temple, BPJC, had tried to cancel Crystal's bat mitzvah because I didn't have money to pay for the bat mitzvah fees or some shit. And my husband refused to pay it because I thought, well, he'll pay it. He refused to pay it. So then they wanted to cancel the entire bat mitzvah and shame me. And my Rabbi Uri Tamal, IAM, told them that if they treated the widow and the orphan, or in my case, the divorcee and single mother like that, he would write to every Jewish newspaper in the known Jewish world, including America and Israel and the UK, and tell everyone exactly what kind of vermin they are, how they treat the poor in their midst, which was me. Can you imagine the shame and the disgrace and the horror? But I mean, what a beautiful thing he did for me. He fought for me yet again so that my daughter could have her bat mitzvah. And then when Jasmine's came around, well, I actually said to the board members of that shul temple, I actually said to them, don't even fucking think about sabotaging Jasmine's bat mitzvah or causing me distress this time. You've done enough. No more. And again, there was some sort of tension about getting a prayer shawl for my daughter Jasmine. And so my rabbi's wife, who, by the way, was not completely on my side and could be two-faced and a bit of a fucking enemy, right? Could be quite savage behind my back, I found out later on, to my horror. But in this instance, wanted to make herself look, you know, righteous and sweet and kind. And I was grateful for that, by the way. Sweetness and kindness in my Brisbane community was thin on the ground. And so she presented me a very old prayer shawl from my rabbi, Uri Tamal, that she said had been his original prayer shawl when he first received his Shemitah, which is, you know, his rabbinic title of rabbi, and had been accepted to as rabbi of a congregation and passed his exams and whatever it is you do when you finalise becoming a rabbi. It's called a Shemitah. So she hands me this very ancient sort of, you know, it didn't have holes in it or anything. It was still kosher, but this very old looking tallit. And I literally burst into tears because it was a huge honour, since it came from my rabbi who had fought so hard for me and my children so many times. But it was kind of a backhanded kind of way of saying, oh, well, since you can't afford a fancy brand new tallit, you know. But I decided for the sake of heaven to rise above it, and I handed it to Jasmine. I said, Jasmine, this is from Rabbi Tamal, and he wore it when he was a young rabbi, first ordained as a rabbi. Ordained is the word. I was struggling to find that word. And Jasmine, to her credit, took it with great humility and grace and said, oh, thank you, Mummy, and wore it to the her bat mitzvah, which again was sabotaged, this time not by my congregation, but by my former lover, David Davidson, who had been given an honour and didn't turn up, and I was counting on all these people to come, and he must have put whispers out, so half the people didn't come, and I was left with a huge amount of food. So that was the disgrace that happened with that. But yeah, I just got that memory of the tallit, and yeah. So here, we hear in Poland, it was a custom to cover a poor person, you know, in discarded prayer shawls from the chest. So I return to the story. Later in the morning, they brought him a heavy pair of hobnailed, coarse-leathered military boots. The boots pinched the old man's feet badly, but Reb Moshe Ber was determined to observe the Yom Kippur fast at Yosefov, and Yom Kippur was only one day off. He left early. There were no more than about 4 miles to travel, but he wanted to arrive at dawn in time for the Slichot prayers. The moment he had left town, however, his stiff boots began to cause him such pain that he couldn't take a step. He had to pull them off and go barefoot. Then there was a downpour with thunder and lightning. He sank knee-deep in puddles, kept stumbling, and became smeared with clay and mud. His feet swelled and bled. He spent the night on a haystack under the open sky, and it was so cold that he couldn't sleep. In the neighbouring villages, dogs kept barking, and the rain went on forever. Reb Moshe Ber was sure his end had come. He prayed God to spare him until the Ne'ilah prayer, so that he might reach heaven purified of all sin. Later, when on the eastern horizon the edges of clouds began to glow while the fog grew milky white, Reb Moshe Ber was infused with a new strength and once again set off for Josephov. He reached the tourist circle at the very moment when the Hasidim had assembled in the customary way to take brandy and cake. A few recognized the new arrival at once, but there was great rejoicing, for he had long been thought dead. They brought him hot tea. He said his prayers quickly, ate a slice of white bread with honey, gefilte fish made from fresh carp, and kreplach. Kreplach are like dumplings, and took a few glasses of brandy. Brandy in the cold would have been delicious. Then he was led to a steam bath. 2 respectable citizens accompanied him to the 7th shelf and personally whipped him with 2 bundles of new twigs, while the old man wept for joy. Several times during Yom Kippur, he was at the point of fainting, but he observed the fast until it ended. Next morning, the tourist Hasidim gave him new clothes and told him to study the Torah. All of them had plenty of money, since they traded with Bosnian and Hungarian soldiers and sent flour to what had been Galicia in exchange for smuggled tobacco. It was no hardship for them to support Reb Moshe Ber. The tourist Hasidim knew who he was, a Hasid who had sat at the table of no less a man than Reb Motele of Chernobyl. He had actually been a guest at the famous Wonder Rabbi's home. Hard to imagine how Chernobyl ended up, isn't it? A few weeks later, the tourist Hasidim, timber merchants, just to shame their sworn enemies, the Zansa Hasidim, collected wood and built a house for Reb Moshe Ber and married him to a spinster, a deaf and dumb village girl of about 40. Not quite a girl at that age, people. Oh well, it's Isaac Bashevis, the singer. Work with him, babies. Exactly 9 months later, she gave birth to a son at 40. Now he had someone to say Kaddish for him. As though it were a wedding, musicians played at the circumcision ceremony. Well-to-do housewives baked cakes and looked after the mother. The place where the banquet was held, the assembly room of the tourist circle, smelled of cinnamon, saffron, and the women's best Shabbat dresses. Reb Moshe Ber wore a new satin kaftan and a high velvet hat. He danced on the table and for the first time mentioned his age. And Abraham was 100 years old, he recited, when his son Isaac was born unto him. And Sarah said, God hath made me laugh, so that all who hear will laugh with me. He named the boy Isaac. Translated by Norbert Gutermann and Elaine Gottlieb. And so ends my reading of short stories, Jewish short stories, Yiddish short stories, and I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. And I'm going to have some dinner now because I too need to feast. Bye for now. I won't be having any babies at 100 since I no longer have a womb. And my daughters, who are 38 and 36, I can only look up to the Holy One. Maybe by some miracle, even after this mishigas, it is not too late. But then what would be the quality of my children's genetics? My progeny's genetics, I mean. Who knows? Blessed be the Holy One, the true judge. Amen. For Salah. Bye for now, my darlings. Have a beautiful evening wherever you are in the space-time continuum. Here, the sun is setting. Laila Tov.